The first rays of dawn crept through the thin curtains of the small suburban house, casting a muted glow over the living room. The silence felt unnatural, heavy and suffocating. Sarah stood frozen in the middle of the room, barefoot in the same faded pajamas. Her hands trembled, clutching a crumpled letter, the paper still warm from being gripped too tightly. She didn't need to read it again. Every word was already etched into her memory. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I can't do this anymore." No explanation. Just those few lines, hastily scribbled, followed by the familiar signature. Mark. The man she had built her life around, the father of her 2 children, had simply left. After 10 years together, he hadn't even said goodbye face to face. He was just gone, like a ghost fading into the early morning mist. In the space where his presence used to be, there was only emptiness. The room seemed colder than usual. A pile of toys lay abandoned in one corner, Luke's favorite cars mixed with Emma's doll clothes. Their old photo album sat half open on the coffee table, capturing moments that felt like another life. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt real. His cologne lingered faintly, and she could almost hear his voice murmuring in the kitchen. But all that remained were echoes of broken promises. With a shaky breath, Sarah forced herself to move. She glanced toward the bedrooms, her heart squeezing painfully. Emma and Luke were still asleep, blissfully unaware that their father, the man who used to tell them bedtime stories, had decided they weren't worth staying for. What am I supposed to say to them? The question pulsed through her mind. What words could make them understand when she didn't understand herself? How could she explain that everything they'd known, everything they trusted, had been ripped apart in a single night? The soft creak of a door made her flinch. Emma, her 8-year-old daughter, stood in the hallway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Her dark curls were a mess, and she clutched her stuffed rabbit tightly. "Mommy," she murmured, "what are you doing up so early?" Sarah quickly shoved the letter into her pocket, forcing a brittle smile. "I couldn't sleep, sweetheart. Is Daddy gone already?" Emma glanced around. "He said we were going to play at the park today." Something twisted inside Sarah. "Daddy's, he had to go away for a while, Emma." Her daughter frowned, hugging her rabbit closer. "Go away? Where?" Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. She couldn't fall apart. Not in front of her little girl. "I'm not sure, honey," she whispered, "but we'll be okay. I promise." Emma's frown deepened, but before she could say more, Luke, her 5-year-old son, came barreling around the corner. "Mommy," he exclaimed, his voice bright. "Are we having breakfast?" The innocence in his voice nearly broke her. How do I tell them? She thought frantically. How do I shatter their world with the truth that their father walked away? "Yeah, baby," she said softly, pulling them both into a tight embrace. "Let's make pancakes today, okay?" "With chocolate chips?" Luke asked, eyes wide. "With chocolate chips," she agreed, managing a weak smile. Emma still watched her thoughtfully, sensing something was wrong. But for now, Luke's excitement distracted her. They moved to the kitchen, and Sarah focused on the familiar actions of mixing batter and flipping pancakes. The steady rhythm kept her grounded, kept her from dissolving in tears. Emma and Luke chatted about school and friends. Sarah nodded and smiled, but her mind was miles away, replaying those hateful words. "I can't do this anymore." After breakfast, Sarah dressed the kids, moving on autopilot. She knew she couldn't put off telling them the truth forever. But how do you break your children's hearts? How do you tell them that the person they loved most chose to leave them behind? The doorbell rang, startling her. Rachel, their next-door neighbor, stood on the porch. She wore workout clothes and held a thermos of coffee, her usual bright smile fading when she saw Sarah's face. "Hey, Sarah," she said softly. "I thought I'd drop by to see if you needed anything." Sarah stared at her blankly. How could Rachel know? But then she realized it wasn't some kind of magical intuition. She must have looked as bad as she felt, her eyes swollen, her shoulders slumped. "I'm fine," Sarah lied. Rachel stepped closer. "No, you're not. What happened?" For a moment, the words stuck in Sarah's throat. She glanced at Emma and Luke, playing in the living room, blissfully unaware. "He's gone," she whispered. "Mark's gone. Rachel's eyes widened. Gone? What do you mean, gone? Did he? He left, Sarah interrupted, a surge of anger flaring up. No warning, no explanation. Just a stupid note on the table. Rachel's face shifted from shock to disbelief, and then to fierce anger. That bastard, she muttered. After everything. Please, Sarah cut her off, glancing at the children. I don't want them to hear. Rachel nodded. You don't have to go through this alone, Sarah. Whatever you need, I'm here. The kindness in her voice almost undid Sarah. She wanted to collapse into Rachel's arms and sob, but she couldn't, not now. Not in front of the kids. I thank you, she murmured, but I don't even know where to start. Rachel hesitated, then leaned in. Maybe it's time to make some changes, she suggested gently. You've been holding on to this house, this life, for so long. Maybe it's time to let go. Start fresh. Start fresh? How could she start fresh when everything was crumbling? But as she stood there, watching her children play in the room where their father had walked out, a tiny seed of possibility took root. Maybe Rachel was right. Maybe she didn't have to stay trapped in the ruins of her old life. Maybe, just maybe, she could build something new. The weeks following Mark's departure blurred into a fog of loneliness and uncertainty. Forced to make a quick decision, Sarah left the house that had once symbolized her perfect life and relocated to a modest, two-bedroom apartment in the city. The new place was cramped, the walls thin, and the neighborhood felt rough around the edges, far from the peaceful suburban life she had once known. Every sound, every creak in the floorboards seemed foreign. It was as if the building itself was a reminder of how far she had fallen from the life she had built with Mark. With Rachel's help, she sold the old house, packing away the remnants of her past life. She took only the essentials, her children's belongings, a few cherished photo albums, and a heart weighed down by questions that had no answers. The past now felt like a door she couldn't open again, at least not yet. In the new apartment, the quiet moments were the hardest. She often found herself standing in the middle of the small living room, surrounded by silence that seemed to press in on her from all sides. Emma, her once bright 8-year-old daughter, had withdrawn into herself. She no longer talked about school or her friends from the old neighborhood. The smiles that used to light up her face were replaced by a guarded, distant look. Emma would sit for hours on her bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, staring blankly at the walls. Sarah knew her daughter was hurting, but every attempt she made to connect seemed to fall flat. Luke, her 5-year-old son, was still too young to understand. He kept asking when his daddy would come home, his innocent eyes wide with hope. It broke Sarah's heart every time she had to tell him that daddy wasn't coming back. At night, Luke would wake up crying, and she would cradle him in her arms, whispering words of comfort that felt empty even to her own ears. The small comfort Sarah found during these endless days was her new part-time job at a law firm downtown. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay was barely enough to cover the bills, but it gave her something to focus on, something outside of the constant weight of her own thoughts. The office was small and neat, with gray carpets and rows of files that filled the air with a scent of paperwork and coffee. The bus ride to work each morning was a brief escape from the chaos of her emotions, a time when she could sit quietly and pretend, if only for a little while, that everything was under control. David, one of the attorneys at the firm, had noticed her quiet resilience. He was in his late 30s, with sharp features softened by a quiet kindness in his eyes. He would linger at her desk sometimes, striking up conversations between meetings, his gaze often searching hers as if he sensed the weight she was carrying. "You seem different from the others we've had here," David remarked one evening as the office emptied out. "Different?" Sarah asked, looking up from her paperwork. "You actually listen," he said, leaning against the doorframe of her cubicle. "It's a rare trait." Sarah wasn't used to praise, especially not from someone she barely knew. She had spent so long feeling invisible, like a shadow moving through her own life. "Thank you," she murmured, lowering her gaze. "I just try to help people feel less lost." David's smile was faint, but genuine. "That's more valuable than you realize. Most people don't know how to do that." That night, back at the apartment, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Emma was sulking in her room, refusing to speak, and Luke played quietly with his toy cars, his usual energy dulled by the weight of their new reality. Sarah could feel the walls closing in on her, the apartment feeling even smaller than it was. She tried to coax the kids into a small outing, suggesting a walk to the nearby park to get some fresh air. But Emma resisted, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her dark eyes flashing with anger. "We've already changed everything," Emma snapped, her voice cracking as she turned and stormed back to her room, slamming the door behind her. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, leaving her feeling breathless with guilt. How could she ask her children to adjust to all these changes when she herself felt like she was drowning? She stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door, trying to collect herself. Then, she forced a smile and turned to Luke, who was watching her with wide, uncertain eyes. "Come on, buddy," she said softly, reaching out for a small hand. "Just the two of us." The park was small, tucked away between the towering city buildings. It wasn't much, just a couple of swings and a slide, but to Luke, it was an oasis of normalcy in the middle of their chaotic world. His face lit up the moment they arrived, and soon his laughter filled the air as he swung higher and higher, his legs kicking toward the sky. Sarah sat on a nearby bench, watching him, a bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. For a brief moment, everything felt almost okay. "Hey, stranger." The familiar voice made Sarah turn, her eyes widening in surprise. "Rachel," she gasped, seeing her friend standing beside the bench, arms crossed and a knowing smile playing on her lips. "What are you doing here?" Sarah asked, relief flooding her voice. "I had some business in the city," Rachel said with a casual shrug, "and I thought I'd check in on you. See how you're holding up?" Her expression softened as she sat down beside Sarah, her eyes filled with concern. "So, how are you?" Sarah let out a long breath, her shoulders slumping. "I'm trying," she admitted, "but it's harder than I thought it would be." Rachel placed a hand on her arm, her touch warm and reassuring. "One step at a time," she said gently. "You've moved, found a job. You're doing more than most people could manage." Sarah wanted to believe her words, but the doubt in her heart was hard to shake. "I feel like I'm failing them," she whispered, nodding toward Luke, who was still swinging happily, oblivious to the turmoil swirling around them. "I feel like I'm failing them every single day." Rachel's gaze followed Sarah's. "You're not failing," she said softly. "You're giving them a chance at a fresh start. That's no small thing, Sarah. You're stronger than you think." Sarah's heart tightened in her chest, her emotions swirling inside her. Maybe Rachel was right. Maybe, despite everything, she was stronger than she realized. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way through this. As the city lights flickered on around them, casting a soft glow over the park, Sarah allowed herself to hope. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe that they might actually be okay. Sarah's resolve was tested more and more each day. The chaotic hustle of the city, the endless balancing act of work and motherhood, and the aching loneliness wrapped around her like a heavy cloak, leaving her drained. Yet, despite the exhaustion, she was slowly carving out a new routine. Mornings were the hardest, waking before dawn, wrestling her emotions into a mask of calm before getting the kids ready for school. Luke's bright smile when he managed to dress himself was a small victory, and even Emma, quiet and withdrawn, sometimes offered a hesitant nod when Sarah asked about her day. But deep down, Sarah knew things weren't as steady as they seemed. Emma's silence worried her the most. The girl had always been sensitive, more attuned to the world around her than other children. She noticed everything, people's moods, tension in a room, the smallest shifts in routine. Now, it seemed she had turned all that awareness inward, bottling up her hurt and anger. Each night, Sarah stood outside Emma's closed bedroom door, wanting desperately to go in, to say something that would make it better. But each time, she faltered, unsure of how to breach the wall between them. One evening, after a long day at work, Sarah came home to find Emma staring out the window, her small frame curled on the sofa. Luke was in the corner, humming softly as he built a tower out of plastic blocks. The sight of them, so quiet, so small in the dim apartment, sent a pang through Sarah's heart. "Hi, honey," she said softly, setting her bag down. Did you have a good day? Emma didn't answer. She continued gazing out the window, her face unreadable. Luke, however, grinned up at her. I made a big tower, Mommy. Look, he exclaimed, pointing proudly at his creation. Sarah forced a smile, kneeling beside him. It's wonderful, sweetie. You're getting really good at that. Luke beamed, and for a moment, Sarah allowed herself to bask in his innocent joy. But then her gaze drifted back to Emma, whose shoulders were hunched as if bracing against an invisible storm. Emma, sweetheart, do you want to help me make dinner? Sarah asked gently. Emma's lips tightened. No, thanks. The rejection, delivered in such a flat voice, stung. Sarah hesitated, then pushed herself to her feet. Okay, she murmured. Maybe later. Dinner was a quiet, tense affair. Luke chattered away, filling the silence with stories about imaginary adventures and new shapes he'd learned. Emma barely touched her food. Sarah tried to engage her, asking about school, suggesting a trip to the library that weekend, but every attempt was met with cold silence. After a few minutes, Sarah set down her fork, taking a deep breath. Emma, we need to talk. Emma's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. About what? About everything. Sarah struggled to find the right words. I know this has been really hard on you. The move, your dad leaving. I know it's a lot. Emma's expression hardened. You don't know anything. The bitterness in her voice made Sarah flinch. Emma, You ruined everything. Emma shouted suddenly, her face contorting with fury. You made us move. You took us away from our friends, and now we're stuck here in this stupid, ugly place. Luke's eyes widened, his fork clattering to his plate. Sarah's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Emma, please. No. Emma jumped up, trembling with rage. I hate it here, and I hate you. She spun around and ran to her room, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. For a long moment, Sarah just stood there, staring at the closed door. The words echoed in her mind, each one a fresh wound. I hate you. I hate you. She had known Emma was hurting, but hearing those words, those awful, gut-wrenching words, was more than she could bear. Mommy? Luke's soft voice broke through the haze of pain. Are you okay? Sarah turned slowly, her gaze dropping to her son's frightened face. He looked so small, so fragile in the dim kitchen. She forced herself to smile, though her lips wobbled. I'm fine, baby, she whispered, cupping his cheek. Mommy's just tired. Luke nodded, his eyes wide and serious. Emma's mad, he murmured. But she doesn't really hate you. Sarah's breath caught. She pulled him into a tight hug, burying her face in his hair. I know, sweetheart. I know. Even as she held him, the pain lingered. She stayed there, Luke's small body warm against her own, until his breathing slowed. When she finally carried him to bed, her mind spun, her heart aching. What was she doing wrong? How had she failed Emma so completely? The next day, she confided in Rachel over the phone. I just don't know how to reach her, Sarah said, pacing the living room. She's shutting me out, and every time I try, it gets worse. Rachel's voice was gentle but firm. Sarah, Emma's grieving. She's not just sad, she's angry. And right now, you're the safest person for her to be angry at. But why? Sarah's voice cracked. Why does she hate me so much? She doesn't hate you, Rachel insisted. She's scared, hurt, and doesn't know how to deal with it. Give her time. Be there, even when she pushes you away. Sarah swallowed, staring out the window at the city skyline bathed in morning light. What if she never forgives me? She will, Rachel said softly. But it'll take time. And you need to forgive yourself too, Sarah. Forgive herself. The words hung in the air, like a challenge. How could she forgive herself when she'd torn their lives apart? How could she believe she was doing the right thing when every step seemed to drive them further away? But as she hung up, Rachel's words echoed. Be there, even when she pushes you away. That night, after putting Luke to bed, Sarah stood outside Emma's room, her hand hovering over the door. For a moment, she hesitated, then knocked softly. "Emma," she whispered. "Can I come in?" There was no answer. Then, faintly, "Okay." Heart pounding, Sarah opened the door. Emma was curled up on her bed, her face turned away, but she didn't flinch when Sarah sat down beside her. "I'm sorry," Sarah murmured, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." For a long time, there was only silence. Then Emma shifted slightly, her gaze flickering toward her mother. I miss everything," she whispered. "I miss our house, my friends, and Daddy." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "I know, baby. I miss it too." They sat there in the darkness, the unspoken words stretching between them like a fragile bridge. It wasn't a resolution, not yet. But for the first time, Sarah felt a tiny flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could begin to mend the shattered pieces of their lives. As Sarah reached out to place a tentative hand on Emma's shoulder, the girl didn't pull away. And for that one small moment, it was enough. The room throbbed with tension, loaded with unspoken words and unresolved feelings. Sarah was standing at a crossroads, torn between the familiar pain of the past and the uncertain hope of the future. Mark's sudden reappearance felt like a storm, threatening to wash away the fragile peace she had fought so hard to build. "Can we talk for a minute?" Mark asked again, his voice softer now, almost pleading. His eyes flicked over Sarah and the children, a spark of vulnerability crossing his face. "Please, I promise I'm not here to cause trouble." Sarah's heart raced as she weighed her options. Emma stood tense, like a spring ready to burst. Luke, on the other hand, was wide-eyed and excited to see his father after what felt like an eternity. "Okay, but outside," Sarah said firmly, waving him into the living room. She needed this conversation to happen away from the children, away from their innocent hearts.
Mark nodded, relieved.
They stepped into the room, and Sarah closed the door behind them, trying to isolate the confusion swirling around them both. "I know this is unexpected," Mark began, running a hand through his hair, a nervous habit Sarah recognized from years ago. "But I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened." "Thinking?" Sarah's voice was sharp, emotions bubbling to the surface. "You left us, Mark. You didn't think of us then." "I know," Mark said, his voice barely a whisper. "And I regret it every day. But I want to be part of their lives again. I'm trying to change." Sarah folded her arms, her heart aching. The man she once loved stood before her, looking worn and tired, but could she trust him? "You expect me to believe that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "After everything? You don't get to walk back in and act like you can just pick up where you left off." "I know it's a lot to ask," he replied, his eyes sincere. "But I've been going to therapy. I want to make amends." "Therapy?" It was a start, but it didn't erase the pain he had caused. "How do I know this is real? What if you leave again?" "I don't want to leave," Mark insisted, stepping closer. "I want to be here for you, for Emma and Luke. I want to be their dad again." The mention of their children stung, and Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She was scared, not just for herself, but for Emma and Luke. They had started to find their footing again, and the last thing she wanted was for that balance to be shattered. "What does that even look like?" she pressed, her voice shaking. "What are you asking for?" "I want to be there," he said, hope threading through his voice. "For school functions, homework, whatever they need. I just want a chance to show you that I can be better." "And what if that chance disappears again?" Sarah challenged, her heart pounding. "What if this is just another empty promise?" Mark lowered his gaze, shoulders slumping. "I can't change the past, but I want to try to be present now." Sarah took a deep breath, her mind racing. Could she really let him back into their lives? "Emma is struggling," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She misses you, but she's scared." "I know," Mark replied softly, his expression pained. "I want to talk to her. I want her to know I'm here." "I don't know if I can trust you yet," Sarah admitted, her emotions in turmoil. She didn't want her children to get hurt again. "I understand," Mark said. "But please, just give me a chance to prove it. I won't rush anything. I just want to be in their lives." Sarah looked into his eyes, searching for the man she once knew. She saw traces of him, but shadows lingered there too, reminders of the past. "What if I say no?" Then I'll respect your decision, he replied. But I'm not disappearing again. The weight of the world rested on Sarah's shoulders. She glanced down the hallway toward Emma's room. It was her job to protect them, but was it possible Mark had really changed? Let's take it slow, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. I need time to think. Mark's face brightened, and for a moment, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Thank you, he said, relief washing over him. That's all I'm asking for. They spent the next hour discussing logistics, how Mark could ease back into their lives without overwhelming the children. It was a tentative agreement, a fragile thread holding them together. As they talked, Sarah's heart remained heavy, but a small part of her allowed itself to hope. It wouldn't be easy, but if they were to try, it had to be on her terms. When they returned to the kids, the atmosphere had shifted. Luke had fallen asleep on the couch, while Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, reading a book. As they entered, she looked up, her expression wary. Emma, Mark said gently, kneeling down to her level, I'd like to talk to you. Emma glanced at Sarah, seeking her approval. Is it okay? Yes, sweetheart, Sarah replied softly, her heart aching for her daughter. It's okay. Mark took a deep breath. I know I haven't been around, and I'm really sorry for that. I want to be part of your life again. I miss you so much. Emma's gaze flickered between her parents, uncertainty clouding her eyes. You left us, she whispered. I did, Mark admitted, his voice thick with emotion. And I regret it, but I want to make it right. Can you give me a chance? Emma studied him, her expression guarded. What if you leave again? The question hung in the air. Mark looked pained. I promise I won't, he said, his voice earnest. I want to be a good dad to you. Emma nodded slowly, wiping away a stray tear. I just don't know if I can trust you. I understand, Mark replied. Trust takes time, and I'm willing to wait. For the first time since Mark's arrival, Emma's expression softened. There was still fear in her eyes, but a glimmer of hope flickered beneath the surface. Okay, she whispered. Okay, Mark repeated, his face lighting up with a smile. Thank you. As they settled into the night, Sarah felt a mix of relief and apprehension. It was a tentative step toward rebuilding the family they once were. But she knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with highs and lows. Little did she know, the decisions made in the coming days would shape their lives forever. As she watched her children drift off to sleep, Sarah felt a mixture of hope and fear, knowing the journey ahead would be anything but simple. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of possibility. The room was charged with tension, as if every corner was full of unspoken words. Sarah felt as though she was on the edge of a precipice, torn between the pain of the past and the fragile hope of the future. Mark's sudden reappearance felt like a storm, threatening to wash away the peace she had carefully built. Can we talk for a minute? Mark asked, his voice almost pleading. His eyes flickered between Sarah and the children, showing a vulnerability she hadn't seen in years. I promise I'm not here to cause trouble. Sarah's heart raced as she pondered the situation. Emma stood stiffly, her whole body tense, while Luke, wide-eyed, seemed unsure but hopeful at the sight of his father after so long. Okay, but outside, Sarah said firmly. She needed to protect the children from whatever this conversation might bring. Mark nodded, relieved. They stepped into the living room, and Sarah quietly closed the door, leaving the confusion behind. I know this is unexpected, Mark began, running a hand through his hair, a gesture Sarah knew too well. But I've been thinking a lot about everything. Thinking? Sarah's voice was sharp, laced with the pain of their past. You left us, Mark. You didn't think about us then. I know, he whispered, regret heavy in his voice. And I regret it every single day. I want to be part of their lives again. I've been trying to change. Sarah crossed her arms, her heart heavy. The man she had once loved stood before her, looking worn and tired. But could she really trust him again? Do you expect me to believe that you've just changed out of nowhere? She asked, her voice trembling. You left, and now you want to pick up where you left off. I know it's too much to ask, Mark said, looking into her eyes. But I've been in therapy. I'm working on myself, and I realize how much I hurt you all. I want to fix that, Therapy? Sarah took a deep breath. It was a start, but it didn't erase the hurt. And how am I supposed to know this is real? What if you decide to leave again? I don't want to leave, Mark said, his voice low. I want to be here for you, for Emma and Luke. I want to be their father again. The mention of their children hit her hard. She was scared, not just for herself, but for Emma and Luke. They had started to find some stability. The last thing she wanted was to disrupt that. And what does that even mean, Mark? She pressed. What are you asking for? I want to be there for school events, help with homework, whatever they need, Mark said, his voice filled with hope. I want a chance to show I can be better. And what if this chance disappears again? Sarah challenged, her heart pounding. What if this is just another broken promise? Mark lowered his gaze, his shoulders slumping. I can't change the past, but I can be present now. I want to show you that I care. Silence fell between them, heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. Sarah struggled with a whirlwind of emotions, anger, sadness, and a small, fragile flicker of hope. Emma is struggling, Sarah said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. She misses you, but she's also scared. I see it in her eyes every day. I know, Mark replied, his expression softening. I want to talk to her. I want to let her know I'm here. She's angry, and she has every right to be, Sarah warned. I'll be patient, Mark promised. I'll do whatever it takes. Patience isn't something you can just ask for, Sarah said, her heart racing. It's going to take time for her to open up to you again.
I understand, Mark said, nodding.
I'm willing to work for it. I want to prove to you and to her that I'm not the same person who walked away. Sarah took a deep breath, wrestling with her feelings. I don't know if I can trust you yet, she admitted. I get that, Mark said, his voice steady. But please, give me a chance to prove it. I won't push, and I won't rush Emma. I just want to be in their lives, if you'll let me. As Sarah looked into his eyes, she saw traces of the man she had known, but the shadows of their past still loomed. And if I say no, she asked, testing him, then I'll respect your decision, Mark replied. But I won't disappear again. I'll be here. The weight of the decision pressed down on Sarah. She glanced down the hallway toward Emma's room. She needed to protect her children, but could Mark really have changed? Let's take it slow, Sarah said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. I need time to think. Mark's face brightened with relief. Thank you, he said, his voice full of gratitude. That's all I'm asking for. They spent the next hour discussing logistics, how Mark could slowly re-enter their lives, attend school events, and be present without overwhelming the children. It was a tentative agreement, a delicate balance that could easily tip either way. As they talked, Sarah's heart remained heavy, but a tiny part of her felt a flicker of hope. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but if they were to try, it would have to be on her terms. When they returned to the children, the atmosphere had shifted. Luke had fallen asleep on the couch, while Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, a book in her lap. As they entered the room, Emma looked up, her eyes wary. Emma, Mark said gently, kneeling down to her level. I'd like to talk to you. Emma glanced at Sarah for approval. Is everything okay? Yes, sweetheart, Sarah replied softly. It's okay. Mark took a deep breath. I know I wasn't there for you, and I'm really sorry. I want to be part of your life again. I miss you. Emma's gaze flickered between her parents, uncertainty clouding her expression. You left us, she whispered. I did, Mark admitted, his voice thick with regret. And I regret it more than anything. I want to fix that. Can you give me a chance? Emma studied him, her face guarded. What if you leave again? I promise I won't, Mark said earnestly. I want to be a good dad. I want to be here for you and Luke. Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, and Sarah's heart ached for her daughter. It's okay to feel confused, Emma, Sarah said softly. You don't have to decide anything right now. Emma nodded, wiping away a tear. I just don't know if I can trust you. I understand, Mark said gently. Trust takes time. But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. For the first time since Mark's arrival, Emma's expression softened. There was still fear in her eyes, but a flicker of hope shone through. Okay, she whispered. Okay, Mark repeated, his face lighting up with a smile. "Thank you for giving me a chance." As the night settled in, Sarah felt a mix of relief and anxiety. It was a small step toward rebuilding their broken family, but she knew the path ahead would be challenging, full of highs and lows. The decisions they would make in the days ahead would shape their lives forever, unraveling the threads of the past and weaving a new future. As Sarah watched her children drift off to sleep, she felt both hope and fear, knowing the journey ahead would be anything but simple. But in that moment, for the first time in a long while, she felt the faintest spark of possibility. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window, casting a soft glow over the table where Sarah was preparing breakfast. Her thoughts swirled as she recalled the past few days. Mark had reappeared unexpectedly, filling the house with tension. Emma and Luke reacted differently to their father's return. Emma kept her distance, while Luke welcomed him with excitement. Sarah tried to focus on the present, but her mind drifted to conversations about outings, like a walk in the park or the zoo. Emma agreed to the park, but insisted Mark not come. Luke, however, dreamed of having his father there. Sarah felt torn between her children's wishes. "Breakfast is ready," she called, forcing a smile. Luke ran to the kitchen, bubbling with excitement, while Emma followed slowly, sensing the tension in her mother's face. "Is Daddy coming today?" Emma asked skeptically. "He wants to, but we'll see," Sarah replied. "Let's enjoy breakfast first." Emma nodded, but the uncertainty lingered. Luke chattered excitedly about adventures with Mark, filling Sarah with fear that Luke's joy might not last. After breakfast, the doorbell rang, making Sarah's heart race. She hesitated before opening the door to find Mark holding wildflowers. "Hi," he said nervously. "Now? You didn't call," Sarah said, protective. "I just wanted to see you and the kids," he replied, glancing at Emma and Luke. "Can I come in?" Sarah hesitated, looking at her children. Luke was bouncing on the couch, but Emma kept her distance, engrossed in a book. "Okay, but let's keep it brief," she said. Mark entered, glancing around. "It's good to be here," he said softly. "Things have changed." "We've changed," Sarah replied firmly. "Can I see the kids?" he asked, almost pleading. "Let's start with Luke," Sarah suggested. They walked into the living room, where Luke's eyes lit up. "Daddy," Luke shouted, running into his arms. Mark crouched, hugging him tightly. Sarah watched, her emotions torn between joy, resentment, and confusion. "I missed you, buddy," Mark said, ruffling Luke's hair. Emma observed from the corner, guarded. Mark caught her eye. "Emma, I'd love to spend time with you too," he said gently. "Why?" she shot back. "You left us." "I know, and I'm sorry," Mark replied. "I want to be in your life again." Emma turned away, her sadness mixed with anger. "Maybe we could go to the park?" Mark suggested, hopeful. "I could take you." Luke's face lit up. "Can we, Mom? Please?" Sarah hesitated. Mark was eager, but Emma was still dealing with her emotions. "Let's see how the day goes," she replied. Mark's face fell slightly, but he nodded. "I just wanted to offer." The day unfolded tensely. Mark played with Luke, while Emma kept her distance. Sarah stayed in the kitchen, casting wary glances. After a while, Mark approached Emma again. "Can I show you something?" he asked. "What?" Emma replied warily. "Come and see," Mark said gently. Emma sighed and stood. Sarah's heart raced as she watched. Mark led Emma to the window. "Remember that tree? We used to climb it together." Emma glanced at the tree, nostalgia and bitterness in her eyes. "You left us," she whispered. "I can't change the past, but I want to make new memories." "Please give me a chance," Mark pleaded. "What if you leave again?" Emma asked. "I won't," Mark promised. "I'm here now." Emma's guard lowered for a moment, but she quickly masked it. "You should have thought about that before." "I know," Mark said, "but I'm here to earn your trust. Give me time." The tension in the room was thick. Sarah felt torn between Mark's sincerity and Emma's pain. They were all walking a tightrope. Suddenly, Luke ran in. "Can we play outside?" "Of course," Mark replied. "What do you want to play?" "Tag," Luke exclaimed. Mark glanced at Sarah, who nodded. Okay, but stay in the backyard.
Got it.
Luke shouted, running outside. As they moved to the yard, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. The sun shone brightly as Luke's laughter filled the air. Emma hesitated at the door. "Come on, Emma. It'll be fun," Luke called. Emma hesitated, then stepped outside. "Okay," she muttered, but a small smile crept onto her face. Mark watched them play, pride swelling in his chest. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but this felt like a step forward. The afternoon was lighthearted, though tensions still simmered. Emma kept her emotional distance, while Luke reveled in his father's presence. As the sun set, Sarah gathered the children. She saw fatigue in Mark's eyes, but also a glimmer of hope, something she hadn't seen in a long time. "Time to wind down," she said softly. As they headed inside, Sarah's anxiety grew. Mark lingered, watching her. He was trying, but could they rebuild what had been broken? Later, after the children were asleep, Sarah sat alone in the kitchen. There were doubts about Mark's intentions, but a part of her hoped they could forge a new beginning. Mark entered quietly. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Sarah," he began, "I know I hurt you. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I'm committed to being a better father and making this work." "What if you leave again?" Sarah asked. "I won't. I'm ready to change. I want to be part of your life." "Our life," Mark replied. Sarah looked at him, seeing a changed man but also feeling the scars of the past. Doubt lingered, but hope was growing. "What do you propose?" she asked. "One step at a time," Mark said. "That's all I'm asking for." Sarah realized the road ahead would be difficult, but perhaps, together, they could find a way. Maybe they could rebuild something from the broken pieces. Sarah awoke to the sound of laughter echoing through the yard. The soft morning light bathed the kitchen as she prepared coffee, trying to calm her thoughts. The past few weeks had been an emotional whirlwind, from Mark's unexpected return to Emma and Luke's contrasting reactions. She wondered if things would ever return to normal. Luke ran into the house, vibrating with joy.
"Mom,
"Look what Dad taught me." He jumped with excitement, while Emma, once again, stood on the sidelines, watching from afar. "Is everything okay, Emma?" Sarah asked, noticing her daughter's thoughtful countenance. Emma shook her head slowly, her eyes shining with unspoken doubts. "Mommy, is he going away again?" The question was straightforward, and her weight fell on Sarah like a stone. "I don't know, dear," she replied, her voice delicate. "But I hope not." Emma's eyes drifted to the backyard, where Luke and Mark were playing. "He said he will stay, but he has promised it before." Sarah moved closer, feeling Emma's pain reverberate in her own memories. "I know it's hard to trust again, Emma. I'm also trying to figure it all out." Before they could continue, the sound of a light knock on the door caught Sarah's attention. It was her phone ringing, with a notification from the law firm where she worked. They urgently needed her for a meeting about an important case that had suddenly arisen. Worry returned to Sarah's face. She knew that leaving Mark alone with the children was a risk. "I need to go to work for a few hours, Emma," she said. "Is it going to be okay?" Emma shrugged, still hesitantly. "What if something happens?" Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the tension build. "Your father is here, and I trust that he will take care of you. If you need me, you know how to call me." She called Mark, who entered the house, sweaty and smiling. "It's okay, Sarah. I can take care of everything. Go to work calmly." Sarah hesitated for a moment, feeling the urgency of the work and the weight of the decision. "I'll be back as soon as possible," she said, grabbing her keys. As Sarah walked out the door, she looked back, seeing Mark hug Luke and Emma watching from a distance. That would be a test not only for him, but for all of them. The next few hours passed like a blur in the office, with Sarah trying to focus on the details of the case, but constantly turning her thoughts home. Uncertainty consumed her. Was Mark really prepared to take care of his children? And how was Emma coping with all of this? When he finally returned home, the sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky with orange hues. Sarah opened the door, her heart racing, fearing what she might find. To his surprise, the scene was quieter than he imagined. Mark was sitting with Luke on the couch, reading a story, while Emma, though still a little aloof, watched with less resistance than before. "How was it?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with curiosity and relief. Mark looked up and smiled. "It was challenging, but I think we managed to survive." Luke ran over to Sarah, grabbing her leg. "It was amazing, Mom. Dad told me several stories, and we played peek." Emma remained silent, but there was something in her gaze. Not a complete acceptance, but perhaps a small opening. Sarah knew the road was still long, but that small advance was something. As everyone prepared for dinner, Sarah felt a faint sense of hope. Things were not resolved, far from it, but for the first time in a long time, it seemed possible that they could rebuild themselves, little by little as a family. As the days passed after the walk in the park, a new routine began to settle into their lives. Mark's presence, once a source of tension, was slowly becoming a normal part of the household. He helped Luke with his schoolwork, read bedtime stories, and gradually, in the quietest moments, tried to regain Emma's trust. Every small gesture felt like a victory, but Sarah knew the road ahead was still long, filled with bumps and uncertainty. One warm afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the window, Sarah had an idea. "How about a movie night at home?" she asked, gathering the children in the living room. "We can make popcorn, and each of us can choose a movie." Luke's eyes lit up with excitement. "I want to watch an adventure movie," he shouted, jumping up and down. Emma, sitting quietly on the couch, looked thoughtful. "But what if Dad picks a boring movie?" she asked, her arms crossed, a small hint of distrust in her tone. Mark, overhearing the conversation, stepped in with a smile. "Why don't we vote? Each one of us can choose a movie, and we'll decide together which one to watch." Luke beamed. "That sounds fair," he exclaimed, already bubbling with excitement. Emma hesitated but finally offered a small smile. Slowly, the spirit of collaboration began to form, and Sarah felt a gentle breath of hope. The afternoon was spent debating movie choices, laughter echoing through the house as each person defended their selection. Sarah stayed quiet, watching the interactions unfold, savoring every moment. It felt like she was witnessing a theater of hope, each of them playing their part. As the evening set in, the living room transformed into a cozy space, dimly lit by the soft glow of the television. Mark, with careful precision, made popcorn, while Sarah arranged the sofa with soft cushions and blankets. Luke squeezed himself between them, grinning from ear to ear, while Emma settled into her corner, still holding on to a bit of distance, but visibly curious. The first movie started, and soon the air was filled with laughter. Mark made funny comments, causing Luke to giggle uncontrollably, and even Emma, over time, began to relax and laugh. The lightness of the moment felt like a triumph for Sarah. But amid the joy, Sarah couldn't ignore the lingering tension between Emma and Mark. She knew the wound left by his absence was still raw, and while time might help, it wouldn't be enough to heal everything. For now, though, she chose to focus on the present, allowing herself to enjoy the laughter without the weight of the past looming over her. After the first movie, it was Emma's turn to pick. Mark leaned toward her, speaking softly. "I hope you like it." Emma gave a small nod, still hesitant, but as the movie played, Sarah noticed her daughter slowly becoming more engaged. Luke exchanged glances with Mark, both immersed in the adventure on the screen. For a moment, the distance between them seemed to shrink. When the movie ended, Sarah suggested a break. "Let's have a snack before the next one. How about ice cream?" Luke's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Yes, ice cream." Mark smiled and looked at Emma. "What's your favorite?" he asked, trying to draw her into the conversation. Emma glanced at him warily before answering. "Chocolate." "Great choice," Mark replied, keeping his tone light. "We can make sundaes with chocolate and strawberries." "How does that sound?" Sarah watched from the sidelines as Mark moved around the kitchen with ease, gathering ingredients. The tension in the air softened slightly, but the shadow of uncertainty remained. As they prepared the ice cream, Mark shared stories from his childhood, funny anecdotes about making sundaes with his mother. Luke was captivated, asking question after question, while Emma listened quietly, her expression gradually softening. The kitchen filled with laughter, the scent of ice cream and warm memories blending together. Sarah found herself smiling, watching the delicate connections forming between them. By the time they returned to the living room with their sundaes in hand, Emma seemed more at ease. "You really know how to make ice cream, Daddy," she said, her voice almost playful. "Thanks, Emma. And if you'd like, I can teach you how to make it next time," Mark offered. Emma's response was a quiet nod, but it felt like a victory. As the next movie played, the room filled once again with laughter. Mark made sure to include Emma in the conversation, asking about her favorite scenes and genuinely complimenting her choices. Sarah could feel the tension dissipating little by little, and with every small smile Emma gave, it felt like a step toward healing. Later, as the children became engrossed in their conversations, Sarah seized the moment to talk to Mark. "I'm happy with what I'm seeing," she said, her voice soft but cautious. "But we still need to go slow." "I know," Mark replied earnestly. "I'm trying, Sarah. I want Emma to trust me again. That's the most important thing." "I want her to trust you too," Sarah said, glancing toward the children. "But it's going to take time. We can't rush this." Mark nodded in agreement. "I understand. I'm here for the long haul, whatever it takes." By the end of the night, as the children got ready for bed, Sarah sat next to Emma, brushing her daughter's hair. "I saw you having fun today," she said softly. Emma hesitated for a moment before admitting it was fun, but her voice wavered as she added, "I'm still scared." "It's okay to feel scared," Sarah replied, wrapping her arms around her daughter. "Change is hard, and it's okay to take your time. But what matters is that we're in this together." Emma sighed and nodded, leaning into her mother's embrace. "I don't want to get hurt again." "I know, sweetheart. And we're going to be patient. We'll do it together," Sarah assured her, warmth filling her chest. As Sarah pulled away, she couldn't help but feel that although the path ahead was still uncertain, there was a glimmer of hope lighting their way. The movie night had been a small step, but an important one. For the first time in a long while, Sarah allowed herself to believe that love could be rebuilt, slowly, carefully, and piece by piece, if they were willing to take the next step together. As the stars twinkled outside, Sarah knew they were all embarking on this journey hand in hand, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, united by love and the determination to create a new story as a family.